Alright guys, so I am going to put brain pop. I'll be pausing the video while the video's playing, and then you'll be having a little mini quiz after this video. So once again, pay attention to the video and pay attention to me as well.
Moby. What was the American Revolution like? From Liam. The American Revolution was a long and bitter war. The colonists were way outmatched. Instead of a real army, all they had were local militias, volunteer forces where soldiers could come and go as they pleased. And they were up against the British, the most powerful military in the world. The fighting began when British soldiers came to destroy a stockpile of weapons in Massachusetts. But the colonists knew they were coming. On their famous midnight ride, Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Samuel Prescott warned leaders that the British were on the march. Well, on April 19, 1775, a colonial militia met the British at Lexington, Massachusetts.
So remember that the first battle happened in Lexington and Concord. This is the first battle of the American Revolution. Always remember, Massachusetts looks like a handgun, and it's kind of because they're the state that rebelled against the British. That's an easy way to remember it as well. So remember, Lexington and Concord is going to be the first official battle that starts the American Revolution.
The colonists numbered only 75 men against 700 redcoats. The first shots of the war were fired. When it was over, a handful of colonists were dead, along with one British soldier. The British Army marched on to Concord, Massachusetts, where more than 400 colonial Minutemen were waiting for them. The Minutemen were militia fighters who pledged to be ready at a minute's notice. They lived up to their name and forced the British into retreat. Shortly after, colonial leaders met in the Second Continental Congress. They decided to form a Continental Army led by George Washington. His first move? Cut off British troops stationed in Boston by surrounding the city. Battles erupted around the city as the British tried to break out. But Washington's army held strong, and the redcoats were forced to flee by ship. Hooray! Believe it or not, most colonists still hoped for peace with England at this point. But Thomas Paine's famous 1776 pamphlet, Common Sense.
Remember, he wrote the pamphlet of Common Sense because it was common sense for America to become an independent country, for us to we're able to stand on our own 2 feet. Just remember how we said the colonies were babies when they first got colonized by England. As years gone on, they become more adults. They become teenagers. Now they're obviously in their 20s. Now they're adults. They don't want to be depending on their mother country or their mother forever. Now they can be independent from their mother country, which means they want to be independent. They want to be not told what to do anymore. So that's kind of what Common Sense and Thomas Paine was trying to say in his pamphlet.
Convinced many that the only course was independence. The text highlighting question in our challenge feature has a passage from Common Sense. Check it out. Anyway, a few months after Paine published Common Sense, the Continental Congress wrote the Declaration of Independence.
That's going to be a question, so make sure you remember when it was made, what day, what year, why it was made, and who was the person that wrote the Declaration of Independence. That's super, super important.
After it was adopted by all 13 colonies on July 4th, there was no going back. The colonies and England were at war. Despite their early successes, the colonists knew it was going to be a long fight. Getting people to join the Continental Army was a tough sell. The British had superior numbers, equipment, and training. And they were sending reinforcements. In Trenton, New Jersey, thousands of enemy troops were massing on the Delaware River. But Washington had a few tricks up his sleeve. On Christmas Day in 1776, he led his army across the icy water and launched a surprise attack. Hundreds of enemy troops were captured. After that victory, the colonial army had no trouble attracting recruits. The Battle of Saratoga in New York was another key turning point. American forces surrounded and captured an entire British army of more than 5,000 troops. An American general named Benedict Arnold helped win that one.
Really quickly, going back to Saratoga, please remember that the Battle of Saratoga, it happened in October of 1777. It's a lucky year, 1777, because, I mean, think about it. It's a turning point of the American Revolution. After this battle, that's when France will start giving us aid and military support to defeat the British during the American Revolution. So once again, please remember these battles and why it's significant during this time frame.
That's right. He eventually switched sides and became a traitor for England.
Had to be an Arnold.
Over in Europe, Benjamin Franklin was busy charming the French. Using the news of victory at Saratoga, he secured a promise of military and financial support. The French were longtime rivals of the British and couldn't resist a chance to give them a hard time. France even convinced Spain, another enemy of England, to join the fight. The British now had to deal with many different foes on both land and sea, but the American army was still short on supplies. In the winter of 1777, more than 10,000 of Washington's troops...
Let's see how many of y'all can remember this. This is going to be known as, anybody know? Valley Forge. So this will happen during Valley Forge in December of 1777 all the way until January, February. Many soldiers of the Continental Army were starving and dying, freezing to death because they did not have enough supplies. And this is something that was a downfall. That's why we remember the V going downhill. It's kind of it's a pretty sad historical moment. But then the V goes up when you guys remember my way of teaching to y'all. Because then after this, the Continental Army will become professional trained army. Because we have Mr. Steuben. He's going to be the drill sergeant that trains our militia into a real professional army.
Were stationed at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. They had nowhere near enough food and slept in tiny, freezing shelters. 1 out of every 4 men died from cold, starvation, and disease. It was a low point for the war effort, but the military successes kept coming. On the sea, John Paul Jones harassed British towns and ships with small attacks. He didn't win any major victories, but it embarrassed the British Navy that they couldn't capture him.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Gotta refresh it again.
On land, American forces began to use the British Army's size against it with guerrilla warfare. No, guerrilla warfare. Instead of meeting on the open battlefield, colonial fighters staged small ambushes. British supply columns were big targets and unable to react quickly. The attacks were minor, but they kept British troops constantly on edge. The final victory came in 1781 in Yorktown, Virginia. Thousands of French and American troops trapped British forces along the coast. Meanwhile, the French Navy prevented any escape by sea. After 3 weeks of steady cannon fire, the British finally surrendered. More than 5 years of fighting had left both sides bitter. The top British general, Lord Cornwallis, refused to attend the surrender ceremony. So, Washington refused to accept the traditional sword. Yeah, I think we've gotten over it since then. Britain has been our closest ally for more than a century. Hey, where'd you go? Oh, a rematch, eh? You're on. Alright,
so going back to this really quickly. So please remember, the Declaration of Independence was made in 1776 on July 4th. And it was basically telling Great Britain that the colonies were no longer going to be depending on Great Britain, which is their mother country. They declared their independence because they wanted to be free and they wanted to be their own country. Now, remember, in order for that to be true, you have to win the war. And basically, the Continental Army was not successful in the beginning, but after the Battle of Saratoga, that's when everything starts to turn in their favor. That's when France starts giving them help. And then finally, in 1781, the Battle of Yorktown, Virginia, that's when the British will surrender because they are blockaded by the French and by the Continental Army. So once again, this is a little summary of the American Revolution. We know there's a lot more that was left out, but we're going to continue to review this because this is going to be our next part of our unit mastery. We're going to have a unit mastery quiz over unit 2. Okay? So once again, you're going to have some questions to do, which is your exit ticket, so make sure you complete them. If you need to look at the video again, you can. So once again, please submit your exit ticket before you leave my class today.
You win.